I would bike from Roseville to Sacramento to Hussein's shop, and it would be with customers. He would laugh. He would be in the back, putting things in the freezer, organizing his shop, just like what people do. And then he would come and sit. I would sit by the register, by the window, while he was doing work, and sometimes I would ask while sitting by myself. I rode all the way from Roseville to Sacramento just to sit by myself. I could have done that at the car wash or at the house. Because, you're a kid, you don't understand things, and you're very self-involved because you're in so much pain. It's just about you. And I think unconsciously, because you knew that Hussein was a culprit, he was the one who did this to you, you should also in some ways pause doing things for the business and just come and sit next to you and talk to you. But that's how he made his living, so he was busy. And then he would come and sit, and then he would say, okay, what next? Digechi, what next? And then you would ask a question, but he was no longer distracted by his shop, everything was done. And then you would ask him a question or an interpretation of a poem. You would want him to give a commentary. And then all of a sudden something about him would change. There would be no one at the shop. And even if someone was to come by, to buy a thing or two, he would continue the conversation. He wouldn't even look at the customer. He would just say, it's like $10. And he was so short with the customer that, how the Persians are. You say hello, and by the time you say goodbye, it's like an hour has passed. So I guess the answer to your question, I would put it in this way. I think different parts of life pull out different parts of you. And then you remember that you're tired of being exploited by life, and your interests are elsewhere. And despite the sink being filled with dirty dishes and the house being unkept, you kind of just sit on the sofa and you open a book, some book on Gurdjieff or something, and you begin to read it because you miss this other part of you, and you don't want to give what little energy you have, time you have, to just keep washing dishes and to keep figuring out, what school your daughter needs to go, what camp she needs to go. There was a movie with, I think his name is Jaden Smith, Will Smith's son, and Jackie Chan playing Karate Kid. Jackie Chan had lost his wife and I think children in a car accident, and so he would get drunk. And that kid was being bullied by the small community he belonged to. And one day Jackie Chan comes and rescues him. And this kid asks Jackie to teach him martial arts, and he says no. What's interesting about the movie, when I think of it now, is you have a guy who's really proficient, he's sacrificed a lot of his time and energy perfecting this particular craft. But then something in life happens, and you realize martial arts is not going to bring your wife back, it's not going to bring your kids back. And perhaps you say, instead of being at the gym 5-6 hours a day, I should have spent more time with the family. And so there's a good amount of guilt. So every time you want to practice martial arts, you realize that it was because of this particular thing that you were involved with that you missed out on your family. So he never practiced, just got drunk. And Jaden kept asking him, teach me. I know you know martial arts, teach me. And there came this breaking point where something about Jackie Chan opened up and said, maybe I should stop drinking, and maybe I should help this kid. And that's what they did. I think there are two people in this equation. Someone needs to run into a teacher to become a student, and someone who has something on the inside, they need a student for that teacher within to come out. It's like you're an artist, and maybe you need to be exposed to some of the images from the Middle East where people have been bombed and they've been massacred, and that inspires you to grab your pen, write a poem, or to do a sketch or a painting of sorts. It's funny when I look at the kids, because I joke around a lot. They don't take me seriously. And in many ways, it's a good thing because the burden is now on Sarah to take care of, some of their issues. And I think I am the way I am with them because they're just kids. They don't have the language, they don't have the experience. There is nothing useful about them when it comes to the areas of my own interest. And so I have no choice but to kind of devolve and go to their level for an hour or two. And it's a conversation that I have with Sarah sometimes, or just with myself, that are the kids ever going to get to a place where they become interested in the things I am interested in? I remember Shahram Nazari had come up with this music album, Yadigar Dost, Remembering a Friend. The couplets by Rumi. It's a beautiful hour music. And I went to Hussein's shop and he said, "So Amir, have you learned or practiced any new music or song?" I said, yeah. He said, "Okay, sing it for me, just don't go so high because, there is this pizza shop next door." I said, "Okay." And I sang the song, but he was just staring into the sky. And when I was done, he looks at me and says, "Do you know what I was doing?" I said, "No." So I was hoping that one day you come here and you'd be interested in the things that I am interested in. Your song is good, your voice is good, but it doesn't have a foundation. It doesn't have understanding. It doesn't have sacrifice. Even though, you sing it well and you have a nice voice, none of those things are interesting for me unless you allow me to build this foundation for you. And I guess in essence, what he was telling me is that, Amir, you're useless. And you can only be useful if I'm able to kind of create this foundation in you. And then your music can rest on this foundation. Maybe he was just in a funny mood, that he wanted to talk to me about something serious, but I wasn't a serious student of these ideas. I was a serious student of music. And so his interest had to be pushed down. He couldn't bring it out because he didn't see me being that interested. So students need teachers. In other words, someone needs to run into someone and all of a sudden they find themselves for the first time being a student. And for teachers to express whatever it is that they teach, they need a student. And sometimes you don't really need another human being to be your student so you can come out. I think these days, if you're able to write, this blank sheet of paper or your desktop, it's just waiting. It's like any good student. It's submit, surrender, it's just completely blank. And that's what happens when you fall in love with someone. You may have all these emotions, all these things you want to talk about, but the moment you're there, it's like you're empty, you have nothing. And so you turn on your computer and it's just a blank screen. Whatever you want to write, I'll listen. And that's what would happen with Hussein. We would go there and anything he would say, we would just receive. It's a funny thing being in the classroom and when students ask questions. When you genuinely and sincerely ask a question from someone, there is something about you, and it's unspoken, and for the most part, the person is unaware of it. It's a confession of sorts that I don't know, and I don't know how to know, and I can't know. All I know is I come here, I look at you, I ask my question in hopes of getting something. For them to be asking questions, they have to see something in the person standing in front of them. And then the person standing in front of the classroom also goes through a transformation. So sometimes people begin to talk about like silly things in the class and ask silly questions. And in some ways it's a frustrating few minutes because you have to tolerate the silliness. Nothing good comes out of you. You just shake your head and you take a deep breath and you say, "Really, are you guys serious?" And then another raises their hand and asks a really, really good question. And then something about you just changes. And it's all because of the question. And it's all because of the space. We had a psychology teacher. She was part-time. This is like way, way back in 2004, 2005. And her office was next door to mine. And one day she comes in and she was asking for something. She looks at me and she says, how could you be so focused all the time? Something like that. You know, I would go to campus very, very early in the morning, and I would have people like waiting, and they would come to the office and they would sit and they would like ask questions, and then they would leave, and then another would come, and then I would go to class. And in my younger early days, I would be on campus from like 7 or 6 in the morning all the way till 10 at night. And when you keep doing this over and over and over again, something happens to you and something happens to the people around you. Imagine for a moment if I was teaching my classes online. You know, there is no interaction. Nothing that is good about you comes out. And even if it was to come out, you would have to like write them down. The sort of feedback that sometimes people give. But you need that physical presence. I'm not quite sure which book it was of Ouspensky or some other book, where Gurdjieff talks about the same thing, that there are no students without teachers and there are no teachers without students. I think the analogy he made was one hand washes the other. And it's very true. But it's usually the teacher who benefits most from the interaction. You know, the student sees in the teacher something. For us, we just saw Hussein as the embodiment of perfection, of wisdom, something profoundly sacred. And so Hussein was the conduit. And so when we went there, sometimes his look, his body language would just change you know, in a good way for us. I think when Hussein would see us and we would ask questions, I think he got a chance to see his own creativity. While he was being creative in thought and speech, it also made us feel certain things, like intensely. And so everybody just benefited in some ways.